Well, good morning, everyone. When we read about the federal budget on the weekend, we thought we were going to receive about half what New South Wales and Victoria and South Australia were going to get in the budget. When we read the budget papers last night, we realised that had been halved again. About $807 million of the $1.6 billion we were expecting will be coming to Queensland over the next 4 years. So what that means for Queensland is that Scott Morrison's budget for Queensland has gone from half-baked to a raw deal. And we don't know the basis upon which these other states are getting funding. It's certainly not on the basis of need. Over the next 4 years, a city the size of Rockhampton, about 85,000 people will be coming to Queensland. That's almost exactly the same amount, the same number of people who will be leaving New South Wales. Yet over the next 4 years, New South Wales is going to get $1.4 billion, almost twice as much as Queensland, and South Australia, whose population is likely to fall over that period, is getting $2 billion. It's certainly not because of representations that federal LNP MPs in Queensland have made to the Morrison government. Let's look at some of the projects. No funding for the Bundaberg flood levy, that's in a federal LNP seat. No funding for the Toowoomba Wellcamp Entertainment Precinct, that's in a federal LNP seat. No funding for the Emu Swamp Dam on the Granite Belt, another federal LNP seat. Of course, no money for Townsville. We've been waiting for 9 months for the $195 million that Phil Thompson, the federal member for Herbert, promised his community. Still no money for Townsville. And I want to make particular mention of the Sunshine Coast Stadium refurbishment. There's two very fine Queenslanders, Roy Thompson and Rod Forrester, who've decided to put in $11 million of their own money into the refurbishment of that stadium. We thought that was an important thing for the Sunshine Coast community. We invested $20 million in our budget, still absolutely nothing for that community, which has wall-to-wall federal LNP MPs. So this sends a strong message. Scott Morrison and his LNP MPs in Queensland have abandoned the communities that represent them, and it's about time those communities abandoned the federal government, including Scott Morrison, because the only way this will change is if Queenslanders stop voting for Scott Morrison, because that's the only way they will send him a message that we deserve our fair share in Queensland.
Treasurer, with the federal government's, suggestion that the borders won't open until middle of next year, what does that do when you're crafting the state budget? How does that get impacted?
Well, we're going to have to look very carefully at some of the forecasts now. We know the federal government has written down projected economic growth in the country. They wrote that down from really just over a week from what the RBA was predicting. They've written that down now, and that's about a $25 billion reduction in economic activity in in Australia. So we're going to have to look at all of those forecasts. It is a very serious problem, I think, for our economy that we cannot get the vaccine effectively rolled out around our nation. We see what's happening around the world. Yes, the pandemic continues to roll on. In some parts of the world, it remains a terrible tragedy, what is happening. But of course, some other nations are absolutely accelerating the distribution of vaccination. That, of course, for our nation is controlled by the federal government. So if we can get on top of that, that will help economic activity. But to your question, we need to consider those matters. We're going to have to work through and start reworking some of our analysis for our budget, which is due in a month, and look at what the federal government said in their budget last night. Yes, we certainly hope so. The analysis shows that we are continuing to receive our fair share of GST, which is good for our state. That's very important. Certainly, we don't want any state, the position of Queensland is, no state should be worse off under GST distribution, and that appears to be the case.
Does that mean we'll have to go it alone with some of those projects you listed?
We're not going to fill the hole. We're not going to fill the holes that Scott Morrison has dug for Queensland. That he can't come to the party and fund this growing state is a criticism and a condemnation of him. It's not a condemnation of our government, which is investing $56 billion in infrastructure over 4 years. Look, the federal government is spending $110 billion on infrastructure across the nation in 10 years. Our government alone is spending $100 billion in Queensland over the same period. It's about time the federal government looked to where people are moving with their feet. They are voting with their feet and coming to Queensland. If Scott Morrison says, how good's Queensland? Well, he needs to start cutting the cheques to demonstrate that.
So those projects might go anywhere.
We're not going to fill the hole. We're not going to fund those programs where they're a very fair deal for the federal government when they've decided to pour billions of dollars into other states and not into the big engine of interstate migration and economic growth in this nation, which is Queensland.
The Premier is
Well, the number one thing we need from the federal government is a decision to allow international flights to land at Wellcamp. If they were to make that decision and approve that facility as a national quarantine facility, Howard Springs is operating perfectly well in the Northern Territory. The federal government has never complained about that. That is a national quarantine facility. For the life of us, we don't understand why the Morrison government won't support a deal where the Wagner Corporation and the Wagner family has said they will effectively build it and fund it from quarantine charges. This is an absolute no-brainer for our state and nation, and only Scott Morrison can answer the question, when we know there are thousands of Australians who want to return to Australia, why he won't back in a ready-made answer to quarantine for Australia.
The Triple C said that the police have been discriminating against men in their hiring practices, trying to reach their gender target. Do you think that makes affirmative action essentially illegal? And what do you think about gender targets?
Look, I've just heard about the report. I haven't looked at it, and the government will, of course, need to analyse that and form a view on the report handed down by the Triple C this morning. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.